everybody! Welcome to this lovely event! My name is Kai. I'm a member of the social media fleet here at Mysterious Galaxy, and today is a very special event because we are celebrating the release of The Discord of Gods, by Jenn Lyons. So we are so very excited to be hosting Jenn today. Not only is she a well-loved author amongst our staff, but she was a nominee for the Astounding Award for Best New Writer in 2020. Very well deserved indeed. And our conversation partner today is also very special to us because he's one of our amazing booksellers at the store. Gary Roby is the podcast host and inventory wizard in the realm of Mysterious Galaxy. Some pre-event reminders for everybody. An exciting reminder is that we have signed and personalized books available through the Mysterious Galaxy website. Thank you, Jenn, for doing that. And you can find the link for that in the shiny green box below that reads buy signed/personalized copies of Discord of Gods here. Your purchase through Mysterious Galaxy helps us as an indie bookstore to keep doing wonderful events such as this. So please support your local indie. Also, Jenn will be doing an audience Q&A around the 30-minute mark-ish, so be sure to submit all your questions to the Ask a Question tab below. And I know you're not here to watch me talk, so I'm going to disappear in just a moment. So without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Jenn Lyons and Gary Roby.
Ooh.
It's so nice to be here.
So good to have you here. Thank you. I have been, famously, I think for people who've come to the store, like a big advocate of this series from the jump. We got that advanced copy of Rune of Kings, and I was like, this is exactly what I wanted in like an epic fantasy. And I just want to ask, to start, how do you feel now that it's over? Like now that you've finished this series and it's complete?
It is such a strange feeling. It really is. I thought that I was totally chill about it. Like everything was going to be fine. I'm just going to go on and start writing the next book. Not a problem at all. And then in the morning, I was just like, oh my God, it's done.
It's done. It's out.
It's done. And yeah, that was a lot to process as it turns out.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I had that feeling there's a finale, it's weird to say finality because I feel like it definitely feels like there's room for other stories here.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I don't wrap everything up. I wrap the important things up, but
definitely
there's a lot that's definitely still left hanging because,
Do you have things that you want to like threads that you want to continue to pull up? I guess I don't want to spoil anything, but are there characters that you want to revisit or pieces of the history that you'd like to tell people again, in the future?
Well, there's definitely some stories that I've thought about that, are there to tell, what exactly is going to get. I always wanted to do, this is not a promise because I cannot say what the future holds, but I always wanted to do something with Galen, Shalorn, and Cone as the main people.
I love the three of them so much.
And because there's so much that they still have to deal with and that they're still trying to accomplish. That it felt like that would be a very natural thing to have them doing stuff. So totally. Whether or not that will actually happen, we'll just cross our fingers.
Here's hoping. I would love more. I think that this world is so rich and these characters are they feel like people that I know after so long with the series, and I just want good things for everybody, Jenn.
I know. Yeah, you want to have a happy ending for everyone. Unfortunately, that doesn't always work out that way. But yeah, no. I always I think probably around, I want to say book 3, I started really thinking about who else needed their own books.
Sure.
Those 3 definitely I think needed their own books. At some point I would still love to do something with Tianso. And then there's just a whole bunch of backstory stuff that
sure. what, 14,000 years of history or something.
Yeah, yeah, and like there's the whole fall of the god kings of Zyber, and there's just stuff that happened that never was able to be talked about because it didn't really.
Yeah, I mean, well, the world building is so rich, right? Like it reminds me a lot. I think about some of the things that get like just sort of mentioned in passing that we don't get time to like dwell on, and it reminds me of like Obi-Wan Kenobi in New Hope mentioning, "Oh, I fought in the Clone Wars." And it's just, what are the Clone Wars? Like, what does that mean?
What is that? Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, of course, the truth of the matter is a lot of writers, when you do that sort of thing, you kind of go, well, I'll figure out what that is at some point.
Yeah.
But I do actually know what a lot of those things are. So, yeah, I have a real strong idea on what is some of it has to be and what some of it was, because it sets up stuff. But but then there's also, like I said, what's going to happen with those guys? What's going to happen with the Empire? What's going to happen with things I won't spoiler? What's going to happen with, somebody who's like, are you going to ever do books about the next generation? I was like, I could.
Maybe.
That would be
easy. That would be fascinating too.
There's certainly enough kids wandering around by the end of this book, or that will be wandering around.
Yes,
shortly.
true.
So
that's very fun. Do you have sorry,
you do look a little bit like Volodymyr Zelensky. That's a fair point, actually.
That's very funny. I had glasses for like 10 years. I just got contacts recently, and everybody's like, you look completely different.
You do look pretty different.
You wrote a really great Twitter thread recently, talking about how one of the things that you really wanted to do was like subvert the sort of fantasy like genre tropes and things that people come to expect. Is there anything like, do you feel that you succeeded in that, in like kind of turning on its head some of the things that people like expect out of a fantasy series?
Yeah, I think I did. I think I did succeed in a lot of that. There's definitely, I mean, we all grew, well, I grew up with, certain conventions that frankly don't always survive close examination. We're used to it, we expect it, but you don't want to think about it too hard. And, in some cases it's not even necessarily that it's, that it won't survive close examination. It's just that, there's a reason for the most part that nobody makes Sauron the good guy.
Yeah.
It's hard to pull off. But I kind of made Sauron the good guy. So yeah.
I love that there was no like, oh, we're gonna redeem Relosvar. We're gonna prove that he's just this tragic character and he'll learn from his mistakes.
I have a lot of characters who have redemption arcs, and I wanted to be really, really honest about, the examining who gets one, because that's a thing, like very often the answer to who gets a redemption arc is, well, who does the hero like? Mm-hmm. Or, who manages to sort of swing back into the hero's good graces, and that person gets to be a good guy. But at the same time, as somebody who has come from an abusive background, as many people unfortunately have, this question of how much do we owe the idea of forgiving family is definitely something that I wanted to talk about, because we're constantly told to forgive family, even though in some cases family has done horrible things to us, and you know, when do we draw that line?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and you know, in the case of Rello Svar, you know, do you draw that line when he is never going to admit he was in the wrong?
Yeah.
Ever?
There's a, you know, there's an element, I think, for redemption that is like a desire for forgiveness, to like show that you've grown and want to do better. Like, and Ralph Svar just isn't that person. Like, he is so definitive in what he thinks is right and what he's trying to do,
right.
that
Yeah.
that no one's getting through to him.
Well, I mean,
he believes he's correct.
He's the smartest man in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And he has to be the smartest man in the room. Like, his own ego will not allow anything else than to be the smartest man in the room. So that's a problem, you know.
Definitely.
That was one of the things I kind of wanted to talk about, was this idea. We see it a lot in fantasy. We see it a lot in the real world, as our culture, the culture that we've created through genre, through storytelling, has been turned into the things that we as a culture think are important. And one of those things is the idea that one solo person can save everyone.
Yeah.
We see that a lot. And that has become something that I think is very dangerous. I understand the appeal. I totally get it. But it doesn't usually work that way in the real world. One single person very rarely saves everyone. So it was really important to me that I had somebody who felt that way, and that would not be how the heroes worked.
Yeah.
That they would not, you know, be like, Kieran by himself is going to save everything.
No, well, it's interesting because like he does become an interesting. He's such a good foil for what Relos is doing, because Relos sees himself as that hero, the one person who can save the day, and it just doesn't work that way.
Right.
In that same Twitter thread, you mentioned that like you wanted the series to be a victory that's gained by a team, that is these people working together, and that their individual differences, like, each are going to be a contributing factor in how this thing is going to conclude. Kylie asked me, or wanted me to ask, how, like, wanted me to ask about the similarities between the conclusion here to Chorus of Dragons and like a sports anime, where like friendship is ultimately the thing that is going to save the day in the end.
I mean, that's it. That's exactly it. You know,
Yeah.
we used to joke about, I would joke about that. My husband certainly would joke about that for book 4, you know, because book 4 is really, you know, about the power of friendship, and also therapy or die. But yeah, you know, that was very intentional. That, you know, it was this idea that I was just so tired of seeing. We really have an excess of stories that are gritty and rough, and where you know, the practical ends justify the means, is used to excuse all kinds of horrible behaviors. And you know, I look through history, and almost invariably, anytime a situation has come up in history where that has kicked off a major action, people pay for it later. You know, those sorts of shortcuts always kick you in the end, you know, because maybe not right away. It might take, you know, 40, 50 years sometimes for it to really, you know, throw back. But it's just amazing how consistently there is a price that is paid for that behavior. So I really wanted with this series, ultimately, no matter how high the stakes, no matter, you know, all of these different people, very violent, very grim at times, that ultimately the secret to success was, in fact, teamwork. and
Yeah.
trusting each other. So,
you know, there's so much like growth that happens among everybody across the series, because like I definitely would say that I went into Rune of Kings thinking that Kieran was going to be like the one, right? Like,
right.
and by the time we get into book 4, you're juggling like a dozen characters, a little over that, I think, even in the
Yeah.
Lighthouse, and every single one of them is important to be there. Like, I think any one of those pieces is missing, and things don't shake out the way that we need them to.
Right. Yeah, it was very Last Supper-ish. There was like 13 total.
Yeah.
So,
yes.
I mean, yeah, no, absolutely. Because, and part of that was very like, you had Zaltroth very specifically gearing these prophecies to channel that idea that there was just going to be one person who was important.
Yeah.
And
The
everybody
Hell
else could
Warrior.
the Hell Warrior. And everybody else could kind of get sacrificed and channeled into supporting that one character,
Mhm.
because certainly she was aware that one character couldn't save the day.
Yeah.
You know?
Couldn't do it on his own.
Right.
I love that so much. How do you I know that when we've talked about in the past, when you are working on a book, that you have like your whole map of like sticky notes and breakdowns and organization, but like how did you keep it clear among like the series as a whole? Because it is super dense, and like how do you keep track of, I don't know, like do you have like a lore Bible or something that you're keeping to keep things
Well,
in check?
I mean, I have a wiki.
Okay.
And by the time book 4 rolled around, I'd gotten really, really bad at maintaining it.
Yeah.
Like,
that's fair.
Even now, it's like when I have time, I really do want to go back over and like update everything, because right now it's not. But for the most part, I just didn't have. I'm going to blame D&D.
Sure.
You know, just years and years of like juggling campaigns in my head and keeping track of what everyone had done. It just made this a thing that I didn't really have to think about too hard. It was just, yeah.
That makes sense.
So, you know, I do have, yes, I have been playing D&D for since the old days. But I mean, I do have notebooks that
Okay.
I keep notes in, but I seldom go back and consult them.
Mm-hmm.
My notebooks are typically for me working through problems. And once I have worked through the problem, then I'm good and I keep going.
That makes sense.
So, yeah. So it's much more unusual for me to be like, what did I say I was gonna?
Yeah. What was I hinting at here? I don't know. I love the idea of a wiki for the series, because I'm such a fan of like just like resources and appendices and things. Like every time I read one of these books, I was referencing all the stuff in the back constantly.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in the beginning, that actually was a thing I would reference all the time. Was you know, like, which dragon did what?
Sure.
What was that supposed to be? Which cornerstone was what? But as it continued on, it became easier. So
definitely, yeah. You set that groundwork, and then as you dig at it, it solidifies in a way.
Right. It's kind of like you know, like at the beginning of a TV series, you might not remember all the details, but as you've watched more and more episodes, you'll be like, oh yeah, there was that time with the bar and the thing. So that, I remember that.
That guy who was in that, he was at that place that one time.
Right. That's right. Senrite broke his fingers. I remember that guy.
I do remember that guy. Oh, that was brutal. Oh, that was very. Gosh, I love Senrite.
Don't kick the dog. Don't kick the dog.
Dog.
Don't
Rebel
even
was a
try.
good boy.
Girl, good girl.
Girl. Good
Don't
girl.
don't
Sorry,
even
Rebel.
try to kick the dog. Yeah. I mean, you know, hilariously, even if he had kicked the dog, she'd probably have just like bitten a hand off or something, or because Rebel was like
Also very just,
one of the
just
most
like
magically
Samurai.
one of the most magically enchanted animals that existed in the entire world. Samurai just
Good.
kind
I'm
of
so
in the
glad.
background layered as much spell work as she could on this little puppy to make sure
Ultimately
that she
protected.
was. Yeah, exactly.
I
Don't
love
mess with
that.
her. Don't mess with her doll.
Do you have like a favorite character out of?
God no.
I know that's probably a big question. There's like a lot of.
Yeah, God no.
It's like asking you to choose children, but
I mean, because I have a least favorite character,
sure,
which is without a doubt Tarzan.
Yeah. Oh my God. Mm-hmm.
Terrible human being. Hate him.
When he shows
but
up in book 2, and I'm like, I thought we were done with you.
Yeah. Honestly, like when people started saying how much they loved Senere, I was a little confused, and then I realized that the first introduction to Senere is the footnote in book 2 where she asks Rillisfar to resurrect Darzan so she can kill him again. I was like, oh yeah, okay, that makes more sense because we all hate Darzan, so there's a way to connect. Favorite character, they all have their moments, you know, like there's times where you're just like, oh my God, Talon, you are so much fun to write. Or, you know, when Kieran does something that's particularly Kieran like, or, you know, Talia being Talia, or, you know, just, I could never pick
Everyone's
one and
so
be like
earnest in who they are. Like, I think that their personalities shine so much. When you have characters who are like either just like mocking another character, speaking in their voice or something, and it's just like, oh, like you nailed that. Like the identities are so strong.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
that's it's always good to hear. That, you know, I tried very hard. You're not always sure if you get that, so you know it's good to hear that. But yeah, no, I always love it during the process of writing when the characters have kind of rebelled a little bit, because whenever they do that, that means that their personality is really gelling.
Yeah,
you know, and it may not be a thing, like sometimes it gels in a way that don't always match with my initial plans. Hi Tyanso. Hi Siobhan. But it does tend to mean that they are very, you know, developing a very strong set of emotions. So
do you have any is there like any particular characters that you feel like changed the most from what your idea was at the start?
Talon.
That makes sense to me.
Talon, absolutely Talon. Because I mean, I've joked about this before. There hasn't been a book Talon has appeared in I didn't try to kill her. I planned to kill her at the end of book 1. Teraith was supposed to kill her at the end of book 1. And that didn't, well, my editor wouldn't let me.
Oh.
She just flat out wouldn't let me. She was like, no, you don't get to kill her here. Like, okay, fine. I'm not going to kill her there here.
Do it
and
later.
Then do it later. And then later it would come up and it would just be like, no,
this isn't going to work. It's not going to stick
here. Not going to stick here. Here's the reason why that wouldn't. Nope, can't happen. Yeah. So I hadn't made any plans for Talon beyond mimic, you know, beyond crazy, you know, mimic girl who has this incredibly tragic past. But then she kind of kept pushing, and by the time we get to the end of book 3, I was just like, oh, okay, well, she's
here now.
Gonna have, she's here now. She's gonna have her whole thing. So yeah,
I love her so much. She was also, yeah, she's one of those characters that grew on me a lot because, like, you want to look at her as a villain for the most of the first book. Just
All
like,
of the
you're a
first book.
all of the first book.
All-
You're a terrible person. And
Like-
then, like, I don't know, the more she interacts with our gang, like, we're like, you know what, you're really funny, and like, I do really like you.
I mean, people would tell me at first book, they'd be like, "Oh God, I love Talon. She's my favorite." I'm just like, she's a horrible gremlin child.
That's the thing, because she's a gremlin child.
She never does anything that is not just chaos driven, you know,
Yeah.
in its theme and its scope. And even when she helps Kieran, it's mostly just because she's stirring the pot and,
Yeah.
you know, being an equal opportunity evil gremlin child to everyone, because she had no loyalties.
Yeah.
None whatsoever.
Just, this is what I want to do today, I guess.
Yeah, too many voices speaking in her head, giving her
That's
advice
fair.
on what to do. Yeah, so but she did, yeah, she went along. She changed quite a bit.
Definitely.
Yeah,
That's so fun, though.
I mean, you know, Senere didn't really change.
Okay.
She her core personality remained the same. She just got more information.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but you know, she was always a person who wanted to do the right thing. She just was misinformed about what the right thing was and how to accomplish it. So
Yeah.
but Talon actually kind of got more in touch with her good guy side, much to her chagrin. She's a little embarrassed about that.
Can't believe I'm helping you guys right now.
She blames Kieran.
Oh, of course she does. Of course she does.
It's all Kieran's fault.
He's such a good influence on her.
I mean, dude's just no fun at all.
That's also very true.
He would protest about that.
Kylie in the chat says everything is Kieran's fault. We love him for it.
I mean, you know, debatable. Everything, you know, I don't think everything's Kieran. Yeah, I don't think everything's Kieran's fault. I think you got to allow Rilisfar some credit here.
This is true. This is very true. He is
Yeah.
the reason all of this is happening.
Yeah,
The impetus of it all.
And you know, but in the more modern time, I'm just going to go ahead and blame Taja. It's all Taja's fault.
Oh.
So, but then of course that was always her thing, was you never did blame Taja. She was just in the background going, "What do you mean? I'm not doing anything." Yeah. So
attributing this to me, I don't know.
Yeah, it's just bad luck on your part. So, but yeah, that was the other thing too, is that I really wanted the end of the story to be something where the characters had some serious agency. You know, like I didn't want it to just be reacting to what the villain's doing. Because I mean, that's I don't want to say that's easy. It's not easy. It's just you know, I wanted Kieran, Sarek before him were very, very intelligent people, and I didn't want it to be a case where brawn beat brains. That was really important to me. That it wasn't, that it wasn't, you know, the popular jock beat the picked upon nerd.
Yeah.
You know, for the end of the story. So how Kieran wins had to be intellectually and morally as it happens. But
yeah, you know, like it definitely feels in this book that Kieran has a plan. Like, this is what we need to do. And there might be some improvisation that's happening along the way, but like, he knows in the end that like there's the one chance to stop Rello's Var. And if this
Right.
doesn't go according to plan, like, it could be terrible for everybody.
Right. Well, I mean, and that is that was the other thing that, you know, that I really wanted was I wanted the victory to be Kieran's, not Sarek's, Kieran's.
Yeah.
You know, so this idea that the fact that he did grow up, that he was raised by Ola, that he has this sort of con artist, street thief background would be part of what saves them, what saves everybody. Because, you know, even as Sarek was this great strategist, he didn't necessarily, you know, fantastic if you're fighting a war. He didn't necessarily understand how to use people's weaknesses against them the way Ola did. So
yeah,
and that ended up being kind of important. So
definitely.
I liked that. Hopefully other people.
too.
I think other people have too.
I think so too.
Yeah. It's it was fun. It was fun to pull that all together and make that work. So God, we have 9 questions. We have
9 questions. Yeah, we're hitting it. We're sitting at that half-hour mark. So I'm just going to go ahead and start with our top voted one here from Kylie, which delights me. That says, if the finale team, TM, were to pull an Ocean's 11 style heist, who would do what? They're already basically pulling a heist, but if they were literally plopped into Las Vegas and had to steal from a casino.
Oh God. That's a good question. I mean, you know, I definitely do see, you know, Kieran would be your Danny Ocean in that scenario. And I think that I'm not sure who all of them would be. Because that's a very Kylie, you had asked me a question. I'd have to sit down and think about it. I can't answer this quickly.
It's been long enough since I've watched Ocean's 11 that I don't think I can just one-to-one map characters.
Right. And I've watched enough Ocean's movies since then that sometimes they kind of, you know, switch around on you and like you're not entirely sure who was doing what. Yeah. So unfortunately, I do not think I can. The one who was always eating. No, the Brad Pitt's character. I think that would have been Thurvishar. No, Thurvishar. Yeah, not Talon. Because that was the guy who would be wandering around telling Danny that he's doing the wrong thing.
Yes, exactly.
And that's and that's not Talon. That's
No.
Thurvishar sitting there going, you know, making faces in the background and like, do you think we should do this? We should do this. Let's do this. Yeah. So, but I couldn't tell you most of the rest of them.
That's fair. We have another big question from Kylie. This one is, did you have your ending in mind from the very start of the writing process?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I did. When Tor said yes, or more to the point, just before Tor said yes, they did ask me to give them a series synopsis of what I was going to do. And then it immediately became invalid. And after they signed me, because my editor immediately said, that isn't actually going to work. We'll have to change all of that. But the ending stayed the same. And that was always the ending that I wanted. Because I can't talk about that without spoilering things, but for reasons. I wanted to make sure that that was the ending. There were definitely things that did change, just because some of the characters were not, like when I started the series, I had no idea Javon would even exist.
Okay.
She was not a character I'd created at that point. She didn't become as important as she was until sort of midway through writing book 2, when I was trying to figure out why something wasn't working and realized that it was Javon that wasn't working. But in terms of like the main conflict and the ending of the main conflict, yes, that was exactly what I wanted.
This question does go on a little bit. Like, it sounds like your idea for the end didn't have to change very much. But did you find anything that was particularly like challenging to finagle into place for the ending? Like, just pieces on the board that weren't working the way you wanted them to?
Oh yeah. Because part of the deal on this one is that everyone involved nobody could be stupid.
Yeah.
Nobody was allowed to be stupid. And that always makes it tough. I had to make sure that no matter what was going on, that what everyone was doing made sense for them to do. So that definitely required a little bit of, okay, so when this person is here, this person is here, what are they doing at the same time? Yeah, no, that required quite a bit of finagling. And kind of midway through, I realized that there was a plot thread that wasn't working. And so I had to yank it all and rewrite it. So, originally the first time through, Tyenso's role was smaller.
Okay.
And that whole thing was much, much, much smaller. And it's some of my favorite bits in the book.
There's a lot going on with Tyenso in this one.
There's a lot going on with Tyenso in this one. And I think it's good that there was a lot going on with Tyenso in this one. But that was not the original plan. But yeah, it changed. It definitely changed.
Yeah.
It needed to change.
The next one I've got is from Matt. Of all the locations and cultures you developed in the series, which one do you think that you would thrive in, and which one would you banish your worst enemy to?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, the Vane are always fun.
Yeah.
I mean, the Vane are always fun. I certainly, not everybody, but a lot of people give me weird looks when I say I would not want to live in Jorat. But I would not want to live in Jorat.
Yeah.
Because Jorat is very much a jock's culture and society. I initially used to describe it as, what if Wall Street was tied to football games? It's the whole society revolves around being a sports celebrity.
Yeah.
And
I don't think I do well there.
Right. Yeah. They don't really have a good place in their society for, I just want to read books.
Yeah.
So, whereas the Vani are kind of all about that. So that's part of my...
They have all the time in the world.
All the time in the world. So,
spend however they
would
want.
That would be pretty good. But, I mean... I would probably, depending on who they were and what the situation is,
sure.
Just going to Kur is kind of a terrible thing. The Morgagi, it's more about where they are than their culture.
Yeah.
Their culture, for the most part, is fine. it's different, but core is objectively terrible. So
Yeah. We talked, we had you on the store podcasts back in 2020. You were like one of our earliest episodes. And one of the things we talked about that I found really interesting was that, like, when I got the Arc of Ruin of Kings, they talked about how, like, I think that the back of the book mentioned that, like, this kid was destined to ruin the empire that he comes from. And very quickly it's like, no, I want that to happen. This empire's terrible.
Yeah. I mean, that was part of the thing when I was starting off, was this, because there's definitely a whole bunch of fantasy books out there where the chosen one has to defeat the evil to save the kingdom or save the world, and there's a little bit of me that was sitting there going, but is that always such a hot idea? A lot of these places kind of perpetuate some bad things, and do you really want to do that? And there's been a lot of discussion too, just in recent years, about this idea that we put forward in a lot of fantasy books that a single person, usually a single person of a very special bloodline, is going to save everyone. Yeah. And so it kind of is part of that too, So
definitely.
I mean, the lighthouse would be a fantastic place to kind of vacation to occasionally.
Yes.
But it's definitely not, well, you couldn't stay there long term. I mean, you just unless you're Gadrith or somebody else that's actively undead, you'll run out of food, you'll run out of stuff like that. So right before finals week, totally. You would want to I mean, it always tickled me, honestly, that I'd created this thing that very quickly, like, everyone was using. Everyone was just like, I need a couple of weeks to, in the next 5 minutes.
It's the perfect place for planning.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to, prep this ritual, write this book, do this, whatever.
I have this huge thing to get done and not enough time to do it. So let's go get ourselves some infinite time.
Right. Yeah. To the point where that was part of, in book 1, why everyone didn't realize Thurvashar was who he was because he was too old. Because he'd spent so much time in the damn lighthouse.
That's fascinating to me. I love that.
Yeah.
We've got a few questions from Michelle, but I think we sort of answered the first one, because the first question is asking about, like, how you kept track of all the details and whether you kept a database. But we talked about your Wikipedia that you had worked on at the beginning. So I'm going to jump to the next one.
Yeah, that was definitely a yes and yes. Yes.
Yeah. Out of all the characters that had scenes together, which group of characters in one scene were the most fun to write about?
Oh, no. That's almost as bad as asking me which one's my favorite.
Who's your favorite? Yeah. I
mean, there's been people in all of the books that have had their moments. There's, unfortunately, every time I mention this, people get very upset. I'm sorry. There's about 30 to 45,000. I don't remember exactly how long, words of Gallon, Shalorn, and Cone being pirates, living their best pirate lives that had to get cut from book 4, and I just but it was a lot of fun to write, and I think, God, like, how many only one beds were there in that? There was a lot. There was a lot. But I had a lot of fun in book 3, writing the beginning, writing the scenes where Therese, Kieran, and Janelle were in the Blight and escaping the Blight. Those were Kieran, Jenn, and Thurvishar. I'm leaving Thurvishar out, but all of those bits where they were, trying to escape. Those were a lot of fun to write.
The four of them together, as because they've been involved in this in everything that's going on for lifetimes, and
right,
yeah, really nicely.
Well, I mean, they were originally pitched as the main characters. It was never just Kieran. It was always these four people, and their involvement and stuff. So, I mean, as far as the pirate thing, who knows? Maybe extra book, or novella or something. But yeah, I mean, so that was fun. I had a lot of fun. Writing. Honestly, I had so much fun writing Talon's reunion with Cariel in book 3.
Yeah.
That was me just going, oh my God, I'd forgotten how much fun Talon is to write. Just ridiculous fun. Yeah, I mean, there's moments spread out through all of this that these books were fun. These books were a lot of fun to write. And I do think that probably shows through a lot.
I think it absolutely does. It's one of those things I'm an avid rereader, and it's just really nice to, as later books give you more context about who these people are and what their motivations and their pasts are. And then you can go back and see the conversation that Talon has with Ola in book 1 and be like, oh, there's so much more here than I understood at the time.
Right.
And those relationships are powerful and just delight me to know it.
Yeah. Larillan's relationship with Cariel, which gets spelled out in book 1, but you don't really understand it.
Yeah.
That informs a lot of what happens between Talon and Cariel later on. So, it's stuff like that I knew what was going on. So it's easy to drop hints when you know what's happening there. So not quite.
Go ahead.
Not quite pick your favorite kid, but that's pretty close.
That's fair. Our next couple questions are both about footnotes. What was your process for writing the footnotes and sort of keeping track of them? Were you writing them as you were writing the chapters, or is it something you went back in and annotated later?
I went back in and annotated it later. And part of the reason that I did that, in the first book, the reason I did that was because the book was originally written without footnotes. I mean, it was, I originally wrote the book sequential, start to finish. Didn't really like it. Tried to figure out I didn't like it. I didn't.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
And I was trying to figure out what it needed that I wasn't doing. And I came up with the framing device that I ended up using. And as I did that, I realized that that it made the most sense that Thurvishar would be pulling this book together to give as I said the other night, as a notice me senpai moment. But that as soon as I realized it was Thurvishar, I was like, okay, well, there's no way he's not annotating this because
that's just who he is.
Yeah, because that's just who he is. And I mean, I would be giggling to myself, particularly in a couple of moments where there are bits where if you think about it, you realize that he's actually mansplaining dialogue that Tyenso's dialogue. He's mansplaining Tyenso's dialogue to Tyenso.
I think in that letter, in the intro letter, he mentions maybe there's stuff in here that I know you already know because you were there for it, but I felt it was important to touch on it anyway.
Right. But there's definitely some moments where it's like, dude, she was there.
Yeah, she was there.
She was there. She knows what happened.
It's so funny,
definitely. So at that point, it also made sense to annotate them after, with this idea that that they would be compiling the books first, and then they would be coming back in behind it and adding those notes.
That makes
So,
sense.
Yeah.
I just to like spring off of footnotes just a little bit, but like how did that decision come about where like Thurvashar annotated the first one, but then we have Senare for the second? Like, was that something you knew you wanted to do going in, or?
Well, okay. So, as I don't remember exactly what sparked the, oh yeah, Senary's totally has to be the person who's doing this same thing with book 2. But very close on the heels of that was, it's got to be a response to Thurvashar.
Yeah.
It's got to be her getting upset about Thurvashar's academic integrity. Particularly the couple of scenes that are in the first book that there's no way he didn't just invent whole cloth, the Zaltaroth killing Cammy, the prostitute scene. Like, there's no way Thurvashar was there for that.
No.
He has no way to know what happened there. There's first person POV stuff happening from Zaltaroth's point of view. There's no way that Thurvashar had that. And just this idea that that Senary would get really offended.
you call yourself an academic.
Right. And therefore was going to have to reverse it and do her version of things to kind of show him what just seemed so right.
I love the two of them so much.
That was, I mean, that was planned from the start.
Mm-hmm.
But it was lovely that it worked so well the way it did.
Yeah.
That was definitely a case where the characters totally cooperated with my desires to, make them not kiss, as the case were.
Yeah. Got just a couple questions that are left. The first one is they're both from the store. I absolutely love all these character names. How did you come up with them, and what inspired them?
So, the very, very, very first version of this book had much more traditional names.
Okay.
And when I decided to kind of rip everything apart and redo it and, do a better job with the world building and do a lot of just stuff to make it a book that I was happier with, I realized that, given my background, if I didn't have anything to stop me, I was going to come up with names that sounded very European. Okay. So I made up some languages. I made up Gauram, which is the language of the Empire of Kur. And I made up, Vorum, which is the Voros language that is used by a couple of the different races, a couple of others as well. I think there ended up being 6 in total by the time I was done. Okay. And I primarily use those to name things. So, this idea, because this is usually how it works, that the names originally meant something. Mm-hmm. And, very often they meant something very on the nose and kind of, it's probably a good idea that nobody's translated that. In some cases, that ended up sounding like a normal name. I mean, or a normal name, a more traditional fantasy name. But I mean, that happens. So I wasn't gonna do make a big deal about it if that worked out that way. So like Tyenso, I think means magic's daughter, stuff like that.
Okay. That's really interesting. Because I knew in particular, like, that the Vane naming convention is very specific. Like, the lineage of names among families was something that I was really fascinated by, especially like looking at that family tree in the back of Rune of Kings. and being like, oh, like you can see like who's related to who. Well, it becomes really important when Doc shows up. We talk about Terath and like his
Right.
name.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I wanted to do more of a a patronym first style naming convention, but I didn't want it to necessarily be patrilineal or matrilineal. So I came up with this sort of almost probably causes a lot of family arguments. Who uh, who do you like more? Who do you want to take after? So you get to pick which one it is. I think my editor probably wanted to kill me though, because it wasn't like a traditional, say, a lot of Asian names where it was all run together. So you had a bunch of people who had the very beginning of their name sound the same. I wouldn't do that again, by the way.
No.
That was definitely a I didn't know any better as a new writer thing.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So it yeah, I mean there were some definite spelling rules that I created to try to avoid some of the conventions that fortunately, I guess it depends on how you look at it, that are more familiar to us. So you have a lot of things like rules like, vowels at the ends of names are hard vowels and things like that. So except when they're not, because there's always these weird exceptions in language.
Definitely.
Yeah.
One of the things that goes both ways, right? Like I read the book first and was like, I don't actually know how to pronounce most of these names. Then I listened to the audiobook and I was like, oh, like this makes sense. Like I see it now.
Yeah. I will never forget. We'll never forget. I was at Denver Pop Culture Con and somebody walked up to me and started talking about Ruin of Kings, or started talking about the book. And actually, no, it wasn't Ruin of Kings. It was Name of All Things. Okay. And I mentioned that there was a character in the series named Janelle, which obviously in the real world is a common enough name. Yeah. And she smiled and said, "Oh, that's my name. But I don't spell it the way most people do. I spell it Janel." I was like, as it happens, that is actually exactly the way. Yeah, that's exactly the way it's spelled in here. And
that's great.
She bought a copy. So
nice.
She was very happy about that.
That's dope.
Yeah.
Okay, we're coming up on the end. I have just a couple questions left in this queue. First one is: would you run a D&D game in this universe? Why or why not?
It started off as a D&D game.
That makes sense to me. I can feel that.
It started off as a D&D game. I mean, I've mostly kind of sort of filed off serial numbers, but if you think about it real hard, you can go elf, dwarf.
Definitely.
It absolutely, I mean, it
this
actually
is the
started
rogue
off,
and here's our bard, like
right. Yeah, absolutely. Like somebody was joking about that, like, Kieran's the bardiest bard who bard, and I was like, no, Kieran's not a bard.
No,
Kieran's not a 5th edition bard. Kieran's totally a 2nd edition bard. The one where you start off thief and then you went fighter and then you went So
that makes sense.
But as it all got, I mean, I had spent all of this time developing a setting. When the time came to like turn that into a story, I had to put away Dungeons and Dragons and stop thinking about what would have made sense for a D&D game.
Sure.
There are no dragons in Dungeons and Dragons like the dragons that I created for this story. Just in general, like you can have, I'm certainly not the only person who my understanding is Stephen Erickson also
That makes sense.
His Malazan books also started off as a tabletop role-playing game. The Expanse started off as a tabletop role-playing game. We're a nerdy group.
I mean, like it's an interesting place to start, right? Because it is collaborative storytelling in a real way. And I know people who play D&D and then have, like, in their personal time just written hundreds of thousands of words about their character and the world that they've built and things like that, because it's you don't have time to bring it up at the table all the time,
right? And that was totally me. And then that was actually how I ended up writing my first book, was that my my ex-husband dared me. It was basically, if you're going to spend all this time doing this, you might as well write the thing out. So one question really quick, because I do want to answer this one. Do you draw inspiration from existing cultures to create those that are in the books? I feel like there's a lot of Middle Eastern, North African influence, for example, with the use of henna. So the answer to that is kind of, sort of. I grew up in a mixed racial household where my stepfather was Assyrian. And so there is a lot of that feels very natural and normal to me. That said, I tried as much as possible to not have any of the cultures be directly, this is a stamp of something that exists with a different label on it, because I do not feel qualified to do that. And, wanted to do something that was a little bit more my own thing. So, but did I draw inspiration from different cultures? Absolutely. Absolutely. So.
Awesome.
All right.
I think that brings us to the end. Thank you. Thank you for being here, Jenn.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for being with me on this ride.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so excited for whatever comes next.
More dragons.
I'm glad. I'm so glad. I'm very excited.
Everybody loves the dragons. Yes. Yeah. Well, this was amazing. Thank you, Jenn, and thank you, Gary, for doing this. Like, I could watch you two talk forever. It is the greatest thing. Yes. Okay. Well, before we go, Jenn, where can we find you on social media?
So you can find me at JennLyons.com. Also on Twitter as Jenn Lyons Author, on Instagram as Jenn Lyons and Tigers. And you can search for my page on Facebook as Jenn Lyons. So I am there as well. Thank you so much.
Definitely. This was a blast.
Oh my gosh, this was amazing.
I am on.
Thank you both so much again.
One sec, real quick. I am on Goodreads, but I'm just going to point out that Goodreads software, whatever, they've actually done a really, really bad job of telling me when somebody's trying to communicate with me on Goodreads. I have missed messages because of that fact. So I don't recommend trying to contact me on Goodreads. I mean, and I don't, as a whole, look at Goodreads. So I wouldn't recommend that one.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Thank you for that piece of information for those of us trying to reach you on Goodreads. Okay, well, as I said, this was a fantastic event. Thank you, Jenn, and thank you, Gary. And thank you, audience, for being so wonderful with the questions and with the interactions in the chat. We hope to see you all next time. Good night, good morning, wherever you are. All right, bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.